Chapter 6. When Aunt Pittypat, Melanie, and Scarlett arrived at the party, Scarlett could hardly control herself. It was a wonderful sight. The music played, and ladies and gentlemen danced happily around the room. Because of the great Southern general's recent victories, everyone believed that the South would win the war. Just one more battle, and victory would be theirs. Scarlett wanted badly to dance and laugh with the young men, but it would not have been proper since she was a widow. Instead, she and Melanie went into a corner and sold drinks to those who wanted them. Under her dress, Scarlett could not keep her feet from moving to the music. As the evening grew later, Scarlett grew bored again. None of the boys in the room were looking at her. All the soldiers were admiring the young, unmarried girls of Atlanta. Oh, it wasn't fair. I'm much prettier and a better dancer than any other girl in this room, Scarlett thought angrily. Suddenly, Scarlett saw a man staring at her from across the room. He was tall and dark and seemed familiar somehow. She could not help giving him a smile, and the man immediately walked across the room to her. As he drew nearer, Scarlett's face turned red. It was Rhett Butler.
Why, hello, Miss O'Hara. Or, I am sorry, I should call you Mrs. Hamilton. I did not hope that you would remember me,
Rhett said in his teasing way. Scarlett wanted to disappear. All the older ladies in the room were staring at them and whispering, because Rhett Butler had a terrible name in Atlanta. Well, hello, Mr. Butler. Would you like a glass of wine this evening? She said, not looking at him. Rhett ignored her.
I was so sorry to hear of your husband's death, Mrs. Hamilton,
he said, staring at her with shining eyes.
However, to die for your country is to live forever. These words may ease the great pain you are feeling.
Damn him! He knows about Ashley, and he knows I didn't love Charlie at all, Scarlett thought. When she looked up at Rhett, she saw the laughter and mockery in his eyes. She wished she could shout at him, but then they would attract even more attention. Suddenly, the band began to play one of Scarlett's favorite songs. She tried to act as if she didn't care, but Rhett had seen the look in her eyes.
Madam, may I have this dance?
Scarlett forgot to act like a lady. Rhett Butler, you stop making fun of me and go away. I've never spoken to anyone so horrid, she said angrily. You know very well I can't dance or sing or do anything that's fun for the rest of my life. I'm 17 years old and I have to wear nasty old black clothing and stay at home, just as if I were dead. If I don't, all those old ladies over there will write to my mother and tell her how awful I am. That's how it will be forever, so kindly leave me alone and go find someone else. Rhett was laughing.
Mrs. Hamilton, that is the stupidest thing I have ever heard. Why does society make women like you act like widows for the rest of their lives? And, Mrs. Hamilton, we both know very well that you are not grieving,
he said.
Now, you want to dance so badly I could see it in your face from across this room. And you're going to dance.
Before she could say anything more, Rhett had taken her by the hand and guided her onto the dance floor. It happened so quickly that Scarlett didn't have time to think. But soon she forgot about the gossiping ladies in the room. Oh, finally, after a year, she was dancing. She didn't care what they thought, and Rhett was a wonderful dancer. As they danced, Rhett looked down at her, smiling mischievously. "Mr. Butler, how dare you make everyone talk about me this way? It's not polite," said Scarlett.
Mrs. Hamilton, you don't care if it's not polite at all, do you? You're only saying that to act like a lady, the way your mother taught you,"
said Rhett. Scarlett looked into his eyes. Suddenly she laughed, and he laughed with her.
"You see, Mrs. Hamilton, when you've been talked about as much as I have, you realize that it really does not matter what people say,"
said Rhett. "Oh, Mr. Butler, stop talking and just dance with me. It's been a year since I've danced, and I don't know when I'll be able to do it again," said Scarlett.
"But it will only be a few minutes. I'm going to ask you for the next dance, and the next and the next,"
said Rhett. "Rhett Butler, you can't. I couldn't. Everyone will be angry with me, and I'll have to go home to Tara."
"Mrs. Hamilton, I am sure everyone is already angry with you, so why stop dancing now?"
asked Rhett. "Oh, all right, I admit it. I don't care at all what anyone says. I'm going to dance and dance till I fall down. But don't hold me tightly. I'll be mad if you do."
"Then I will hold you tightly. You are even prettier when you are mad, Mrs. Hamilton. You have no idea how charming you were that day at 12 Oaks when you threw that statue."
"Mr. Butler, won't you forget that?" said Scarlett, turning red in the face.
"I will not. It is one of the funniest things I have ever seen,"
said Rhett, laughing. Chapter 7. The next morning, of course, Aunt Pittypat was very upset. She was afraid of what Scarlett's parents might say if they heard of Scarlett's behavior at the party. However, it was Melanie who persuaded Aunt Pittypat not to write to Ellen. Melanie, who believed everyone was as good and kind as she was, loved Scarlett dearly and even thought Rhett Butler was wonderful. This was because Rhett was secretly helping the Southern armies by stealing supplies for them from the North. "Oh, Aunt Pittypat, Scarlett didn't mean any harm. I know she loved Charlie. Please don't tell Mrs. O'Hara about this. Then Scarlett will have to return to Tara, and we'd be lonely again," Melanie said the next morning. Aunt Pittypat was really a very sweet lady, so she agreed not to make trouble. Scarlett, of course, did not deserve Melanie's good opinion of her, and she knew it, but she did not care. It was during this time that Scarlett began to walk quietly into Melanie's room when she was not there and read the letters Ashley wrote to his wife. They were very boring letters, not like a lover's. Instead, Ashley talked of very serious, sad things. Mainly, he spoke of the war and how terrible it was to kill other people. He spoke of how awful it would be if the South lost, and he seemed to feel that the South might lose. When she read these letters, Scarlett always felt relieved. At least Ashley was not writing words of love to Melanie. She felt certain that, even though he was married, Ashley still loved her. Ashley's letters to Melanie spoke the truth about the war. The northern factories were busy making lots of war supplies for their people, like medicine and clothing. The South did not have very much medicine, clothing, and other things for their soldiers. The northern states used to provide the southern states with these important supplies, while the South would send their cotton, fruits, and vegetables to the North. But when the war began, no one was trading. Now the Southerners discovered that medicine and clothing were very expensive. In Atlanta, the doctors at the hospitals were worrying about the amount of medical supplies available. People had to make their own clothing and live without the better things in life. Meanwhile, Rhett Butler began to visit the Hamilton home. Aunt Pittypat was very afraid of what people would say about this, because she cared very much what people in good society thought of her. Rhett was not a good person to have in your home, because of all the terrible stories about him. He was the most talked about man in Atlanta. But Melanie loved Rhett, and Rhett truly seemed to like Melanie, too. When he was around her, he stopped his teasing and became gentle and pleasant. Soon, Rhett even managed to make Aunt Pittypat like him. Rhett's charming behavior puzzled Scarlett. Why didn't he act like a gentleman to her? Why did he tease her so much? Sometimes he made her so mad that she got angry and insulted him. But then he would laugh and tell her to say more. However, Scarlett guessed that his visits to the Hamilton house were really to see her. Rhett had been helping the South find supplies, but soon the quality of his goods became not as good. He also began to speak up and say things about the war that angered everyone in Atlanta. Rhett was not patriotic, and he did not believe in the South's cause.
"This war is only about money,"
he would say.
"The Southern Army will never win this war. We are too weak. People think England is going to help us. They're wrong. That will never happen."
Soon, Aunt Pittypat's house became the only house Rhett could visit. One day, Scarlett asked Rhett, "Rhett, why don't you just be quiet and not say what you think? Then you could go anywhere in Atlanta you wanted." Rhett laughed.
"Scarlett, I never thought you were a coward. What happened to the girl who always said what she thought? The sooner people in the South realize that we are in a terrible situation and are probably not going to win the war, the better off everyone will be. Admit it, Scarlett, the South is doomed. But I'll be all right, at least. I've made plenty of money, and it's all in gold."
"Well, I think you're horrible, Rhett Butler. I'm sure the South is going to win the war, and I don't understand why you're not loyal," said Scarlett. Rhett laughed even harder.
"Scarlett, you know what I am saying is true, even if you won't admit it to me. You and I are very similar, you know. We don't care about anyone else as long as we are fed and have money. I am sure that you don't care about the war and who wins it, as long as you have pretty dresses and parties to go to."
Scarlett was so angry she couldn't even speak. How dared Rhett talk this way? But Rhett went right on speaking.
"Unlike other women, you are a girl who sees things as they really are. You just don't want to let people see it, because they'll think you're not a lady. But, Scarlett, I didn't come here to talk about war with you. Why are you still wearing this ugly black clothing? I know you've been going to more dances and parties. I think you should wear what you want to."
"Rhett, be quiet. I have to pretend I'm sad about Charles's death. You know how people talk. But I do really want to wear the latest dresses from Europe."
"Well, I have brought you a present, and I want to see you wearing it every time you go to a party,"
said Rhett. Scarlett cried out with happiness as he gave her a beautiful green hat. She wanted to forget all about the customs, which said that a widow couldn't wear such things. "Rhett, it's beautiful. The color matches my eyes perfectly. I love it, but I can't wear this anywhere. I don't have a green dress to match." Rhett smiled.
"Then I will bring you a green dress soon. Now, don't go and hide the hat upstairs and not wear it. Otherwise, I'll come and take it back."
Rhett's gift made Scarlett forget about her anger at him. She began to wonder if he was in love with her. It was true that he didn't act like other men, who had brought her flowers and candy and agreed with everything she said. Sometimes Rhett's comments made her so mad she never wanted to see him again. "If he is in love with me, I'll have such fun making him admit it," thought Scarlett. Then he wouldn't be able to tease her anymore or act so awful. Rhett wasn't afraid of her, like the other boys had sometimes been.
"Scarlett can certainly get mad when she wants to,"
Stuart and Brent Tarleton used to say. But Rhett seemed to like making Scarlett mad and having discussions with her. Rhett knew about lots of things. He even knew a lot about ladies' clothing. You could talk to him about what people were wearing in Europe. Scarlett thought he was very strange. Even though she wasn't in love with him, Scarlett began to look forward to his visits. When Rhett was around, talking with her, Melanie, and Aunt Pittypat, Scarlett was surprised to realize that she didn't think about Ashley for a little while. Chapter 8. The months went by. Soon it was Christmas, in the year 1863. More than 2 years had passed since Scarlett first met Rhett at the Wilkes barbecue party. In this time, the South had won many victories in the war. Even though people were becoming poorer, everyone was proud that their men were fighting against the North. No one ever talked about the hard conditions of life. The Southern people wanted revenge against the North because of the damage done to their lands. Everyone in the South believed that the South could win the war. When they heard that the great General Robert E. Lee was taking his men into the state of Pennsylvania in the North, everyone in Atlanta celebrated happily. But soon, the happy news began to change. There was a terrible battle in Pennsylvania, near the town of Gettysburg. Many, many Southern soldiers were killed. Then there was silence, and no one in the South knew what was happening to their men. People began to pray. On December 5th, the news came that the Southern army had been defeated in one part of the North. No one knew how the war would end now, and none of the Southerners were saying the Northerners were cowards anymore. The lists of those who had been killed in the fighting began to arrive. There was one for each state in the South, and Georgia's list was very, very long. One day in early December, Scarlett, Melanie, and Aunt Pittypat went to the newspaper office to see this list. The 3 women did not speak during the ride to the office, and Melanie and Scarlett were pale with fear. They both were terrified that Ashley might be on the list. There were many people at the office. As people read the lists, many screams and cries of grief came from women whose men had been killed. Scarlett watched as many people she knew lost their husbands or friends. Their lives would never be the same. When Melanie finally managed to get a list, she and Scarlett looked for Ashley's name in deep fear. Finally, Melanie let out a cry. "Oh, Scarlett, he's not on it. Ashley isn't on the list. He's all right." Both girls were incredibly relieved, and Melanie cried happy tears. It was only then that Scarlett could really look at all the names of the dead. As she read the list, she wanted to scream and cry. All 4 of the Tarleton boys, Stuart, Brent, and their brothers Boyd and Tom, were on the list. They were dead. "Oh, how unhappy their mother must be," thought Scarlett. Many other boys she had known were dead, boys who had liked her and been her friends when she was growing up. How could this be? It was all too much. Scarlett wanted to cry, as all the other women were doing, but she could not. She only felt numb. She knew that the happy days of her youth were gone forever. What would happen next? A few weeks later, Ashley came home for Christmas. How he had changed! He looked like a man instead of a boy. His face seemed heavy with suffering and unhappiness. Melanie was too happy to be quiet and shy. When Ashley arrived, she ran into his arms, sobbing loudly. She did not let go of her husband's arm all evening, and touched him a lot, as if she was trying to make sure he was real. Scarlett was also happy, but she couldn't act like Melanie. She couldn't kiss or hug Ashley the way she wanted to. But for once, Scarlett wasn't jealous. She was too glad to see him and know that he was all right. Sadly, Ashley could only stay for 4 short days. Then he would have to return to the fighting in Virginia. During the next 4 days, Scarlett wished for a look, a touch from Ashley. She wanted to know that he still loved her and would always love her. But Melanie was always there, her face shining with happiness. On the night that Ashley was to leave, he was standing in the hall, saying goodbye to Scarlett. He had already said goodbye to Melanie in private. For the first time, he and Scarlett were alone.
"Oh, Scarlett,"
Ashley said sadly, looking at her.
"I am happy knowing that there are still girls like you in this world. Women like you are worth fighting for."
"Oh, Ashley," Scarlett cried. She began to sob. She could not believe he was leaving. When would she see him again? She was deeply afraid and worried. "Please, please be careful. I'd die if anything happened to you."
"Scarlett, look at me,"
said Ashley gently.
"Please promise me something."
"Anything, anything," said Scarlett.
"Scarlett, I didn't want to tell Melanie or Aunt Pittypat this, but we're losing the war. We're dying, and I feel as if it's the end of the world. The South that you and I grew up in is gone forever. Please, Scarlett, no matter what happens to me, promise me that you'll take care of Melanie. I could die in the fighting, and then Melanie would be alone. She's so gentle and weak, and Scarlett, you're so strong."
Scarlett didn't know what to say. She had hoped Ashley would tell her he loved her or kiss her. She didn't feel strong. But when she looked into his eyes, she had to say, "Yes, I promise." She felt as if she would do anything for Ashley, even look after his wife. The carriage was waiting for Ashley. He was about to leave when suddenly Scarlett ran to him. "Ashley, please, please. I feel like I'm dying too. Please kiss me. Just once."
"Oh, Scarlett,"
Ashley said, and touched his lips to hers. Scarlett cried, "Ashley, I'll do anything for you, even... Say you love me. I only married Charlie to hurt you. I still love you, Ashley. Just tell me once, and I'll live on it for the rest of my life." Ashley was shaking, and his voice was hoarse. He had the unhappiest face she had ever seen.
I can't, Scarlett. Goodbye.
And then he opened the door of the house and left her alone.